Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. On the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz will meet with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He aims to agree a path forward for transatlantic relations amid Russia's attempt to manipulate negotiations and ease sanctions on its economy. What should we be watching for in the days ahead? Well, to answer that question, we're joined by Mark McNamee, he's co-founder of the Ukraine Business News Network. Mark, thanks for taking the time and welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Okay, so what are your expectations? About the discussions between those people I've just mentioned, Merz, Rubio, and so on, in terms of crafting a transatlantic strategy?
Well, the expectations are undoubtedly quite low, considering what happened a year ago at this time, with the European audience very, very shocked, even to say, at the U.S. position when the U.S. began unveiling what has become known of Trump's current policy in his second term, with all this animosity towards the current European leadership and the really disregard towards Western unity, towards the transatlantic alliance, NATO alliance, all this. So the expectations, of course, are very low. So now the real question is, how combative, how hostile will the United States be this time around compared to a year ago? We should likely expect continued hostility based upon everything that has been said by Trump and his administration for the past year, including the White House national security strategy, even the Department of Defense's security strategy. Very, very hostile towards Europe, and they're explicit, they're deliberate about their intention, the United States' intention to try to unseat these current centrist governments and support these far-right opposition parties across Europe. That said, the other thing to watch for, of course, is Europe's reaction. We've watched Europe react to Trump's policies the past year sort of evolve over time. And the latest iteration of this being over Greenland just prior to Davos, and then how European and the Canadian Prime Minister, of course, how they responded to Trump then. So we see some stiffening resolve from Europeans, and Merz is really leading that effort. Merz and Macron, but Merz in particular, is leading that effort. So when you ask me directly, what should we be looking for out of Merz, I think that may be the European leader to be watching in particular, particularly as Germany is becoming quite conscious of their need to take over European leadership and even potentially leadership within NATO, and in opposition to Trump's aggressive rhetoric and general hostility towards the EU.
Okay, so Europe has evolved since last year's conference. They're starting to get their act together. What does this mean for Ukraine? Can we expect to see more materiel finding its way there and giving Ukraine a fighting chance to actually push the Russian military out of occupied areas?
Yeah, pushing out of occupied areas may be a bit ambitious, a bit aspirational. I would, of course, highly welcome that, but that's a little bit too much to ask for at the current moment. However, as far as European support, we should be very encouraged with what we've seen over the past year. Now, I think everybody would have preferred far stronger European support for Ukraine, but they have taken over the leadership position from the United States over the past year. And we're seeing that not just in financial outlays, right, but also in strong actual moves by with the public sector, so governments and defense organizations, with private capital and private defense firms coming to Ukraine and creating joint ventures and creating joint manufacturing operations within Ukrainian territory. So that's really, and we're seeing this on the ground. I mean, this is very visible. This is well known. We're seeing this really rapid uptick in European support. So we should expect more along those lines, because it has been very clear with Russia's invasion in the East and now the pressure from Trump coming from the West. Europe has the European leadership. It does seem have received the message and are now taking over the lion's share of support for Ukraine and recognize critically Ukraine is existential for European security. So that message has been received, and we're seeing, fortunately, Europe responding properly.
Well, that's as maybe, but Merz is still resisting the idea of Ukraine becoming a member of the European Union. Why?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of areas where a couple of things. One, this would be reversing, of course, EU policy, integration policy of the last several decades. So giving Ukraine a jump start ahead of a number of other countries that are waiting in line, so that there's a sense of an injustice there. Beyond that, there are a lot of issues where it would be quite troublesome for Ukraine to join. I won't go into really all of them, but one of the major ones would be welcoming in Ukraine's agriculture sector into the common market. And we know how, of course, sensitive farmers are in the agriculture sector is within Europe. And then you add in one of the world's largest agricultural producers that can produce at far lower costs. This really would, we know this would really up, and by the way, at lower standards and not meeting product regulatory standards in Europe. So it would be quite problematic. That's just agriculture. We could go down the list of a number of other areas when you think about, migration and how many Ukrainians are already in Europe, how many more would come into Europe leaving Ukraine. So there would be a lot of problems there. So that I understand Merz's hesitance. That said, that's also why we're seeing this new thinking. Maybe we can bring in Ukraine in sort of this staged acceptance into the organization where they are members, but only in certain areas. And they're trying to come up with some creative thinking because we're in new times. They're coming up with some novel potential solutions. So we'll see how this evolves, but really this is the first time we're seeing something like this.
Well, one thing isn't novel, Mark, and that is the issue of sanctions. There have been sanctions after sanctions imposed on Russia, but it doesn't seem to have slowed them down terribly much. Now, the EU's coming up with a new round, which for the first time, actually, is putting restrictions on ports in Indonesia and Georgia, which handle Russian oil. Do you think this is going to make a dent in Russian oil revenues coming into the country?
Yes, it likely should. The comprehensive measures, when you look at the ban on maritime services on top of all these other things, this would actually so they're moving away from the oil price cap, which hasn't been implemented effectively, and that's why it hasn't had the effect that the Western world wanted on Russia's energy export revenues. But critically in conjunction with what the U.S. has done since October with Trump's sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, Russia's two largest oil companies, this has had a significant impact. So if we continue to go after this shadow fleet, continue to pursue the sanctions that the EU is considering in this 20th package, we already do see this happening. We're seeing clear cuts to Russia's energy export revenues each month over the last about 6 months or so. And so these sanctions are becoming increasingly impactful. So this is a very positive sign, and so it will make a dent, yes. Right,
so more sanctions, please. Now, I'd like to move on to Estonia, where the head of foreign intelligence said Russia's trying to put the negotiations in two tracks. On the one hand, they're saying, yes, we're looking for peace. On the other hand, they keep dragging things out in the hope that President Trump will agree to actually release or loosen some of the sanctions that the US has imposed, which worries the Estonians, unsurprisingly. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this assessment actually isn't too groundbreaking. This reveals what we've come to know over the past year quite clearly. And this two-track description is accurate, and this is abundantly obvious. Russia is talking the talk, and frankly, they're not using negotiations in a bona fide manner to actually seek I should say, a bona fide ceasefire and end to the war. They're using negotiations as simply another tactic in order to achieve their political objectives, which is subjugate Ukraine. If they can take Ukraine with bullets, fantastic. If they can take Ukraine without any further fighting and win at the negotiating table, then they'll do it that way. So this intelligence report is 100% accurate. And Russia, with what we know of the Trump administration in the past week, basically saying we're aiming to resolve the war by June, et cetera. I mean, this is the latest iteration of what we've heard for over a year now. Trump's, consistent, first time was 24 hours, and he was giving 2 weeks to Putin, which he gave, by my count, I believe 6 different times. He gave Putin 2 weeks. Then he was saying it'd be over by Thanksgiving, then over by Christmas. Now he's saying by June, which is far away from now, by the way. So a lot can happen between now and June. But I think that's music to Russia's ears. Russia achieved, when you think that Trump came into office January of 2025, and the concern was perhaps you could get angry at Putin within a couple of weeks or months and then enact these tough sanctions that Republicans and Democrats within U.S. Congress are supporting. And instead, Putin has gotten, now he knows, another 4 months delay at a minimum from Trump potentially considering harsher sanctions and putting more pressure on Russia. So this, of course, this two-track policy is working to Russia's benefit. Trump has dropped this demand for a ceasefire, which is what he started off the negotiations with last year. And Russia, of course, has continued to maintain extreme aggression and hostility on the battlefield and in the air raids and the attacks on civilians across the country, while talking about, oh, yes, we want peace. So It's been effective.
Right. Okay. Well, clearly, I think the actions speak louder than the words. Now, the other area that the Estonian intelligence officer was concerned about was, he said, Russia is producing ammunition at a very high rate, such that they could actually open up a new front against the Baltic states, against Estonia, while maintaining their attacks on Ukraine. Do you think that's part of Russia's strategy?
Not at the current moment, no. But I think it's worth raising the alarm bell here. You have to think in terms of sort of this analysis of Russia's resources. He's correct. The Estonian gentleman is correct to raise the alarm bell here, because this does create the potential, at least for Russia, to do something beyond just being bogged down in Ukraine. When you have to think, in Ukraine, Russia's ammunition and artillery, half of it is coming from North Korea, and that's been the case for over 2 years now. Now, with domestic production ramped up within Russia, this is what the Estonian gentleman is speaking about, as far as the ability to then, if Russia wanted to, they have some of those additional resources to attack elsewhere if need be. But then, that's just simply our ammunition and artillery. You need to think about manpower. You need to think about command and control. You need to think about air support. Obviously, this has become a drone war. So you of course see the drone war continue in that front. So there's other aspects of the fight that Russia would not be able to really conduct an effective invasion in the near future. But
right.
It's correct, I repeat, to raise the alarm bell that it's raising Russia's potential to do that.
Right, so no second front against Estonia quite yet. Mark McNamee, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.